Stop. Prevent your death. Go no farther. There's nothing in this cave worth dying for. Do not go beyond this point. This sign that depicts a Grim Reaper with the bodies of divers as feet is posted outside Vortex Cave. It is a grim warning about the dangers of cave diving for those who are about to enter. In addition to this sign, there's a locked metal gate that prevents divers from entering. Only divers that are cave diving certified can get the key to unlock the gate. And on August 18, 2010, a man named Ben McDaniel would come up to the entrance of this cave. And while it wasn't his first time entering the cave, it would be his last. You see, his disappearance is one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in cave diving. Welcome to the first episode in my Unsolved series. Today we'll dive into the strange disappearance of Ben McDaniel. First, let's start from the beginning. Benjamin J. McDaniel was born on April 15, 1980 in Memphis, Tennessee. He was the oldest of three sons born to Shelby and Patty McDaniel, a wealthy couple living in Collier, Tennessee, just outside of Memphis. However, in the late 2000s, things were not looking so good for Ben. His construction business had failed, his marriage had ended in divorce, and now he found himself owing $50,000 to the IRS and the state of Tennessee. Not to mention he was still grieving the death of his younger brother, Paul, who died tragically from a drug overdose just a year prior. All of this led to Ben's parents to suggest that he take a break and move to their beach house until he could get back on his feet. The beach house was located at Santa Rosa Beach on the Emerald Coast of the Florida Panhandle. And in April 2010, Ben would accept his parents' offer and take his dog and his truck to the beach house. Here he'll be able to form his favorite hobby, scuba diving. It is something that he's been doing since he was 15. He was not a newcomer to the sport. However, he preferred to dive in fresh water rather than salt water. That's why instead of the ocean, he chose to frequent Vortex Spring, a freshwater spring located just north of Ponce de Leon, Florida. Vortex Springs is also a popular recreational camping and diving park. For divers, it's a friendly place for those who are novices and those who are experienced. For the novices, the spring offers a lot of wildlife to see, and with temperatures of only 68 degrees Fahrenheit, you only need a wetsuit to dive. But for the more experienced divers, there is Vortex Spring's most famous attraction, the cave. Back in the 1990s, the state of Florida threatened to ban diving in the cave after 13 divers died while exploring it. As a result, divers are now required to be cave certified before entering. Vortex Springs also built a locked metal gate at the entrance. The only way to get unlocked is to go to the dive shop, show that you have your dive certifications, then one member of the staff will accompany you down and unlock the gate. Now back to Ben McDaniel. Did he have a cave diving certification? Well, despite being certified for open water diving, he was not certified for cave diving. However, Ben was a very frequent visitor. Two longtime employees, Chuck Cronin and Eduardo Terran, said that they would see Ben going on late night dives by himself. Sometimes they would watch for bubbles before leaving to make sure that he was okay and resurfacing. On August 18th at approximately 7:30 p.m., Ben would make his final dive. That night, the two employees saw Ben go in with a helmet and lights on, usually equipment for a cave dive. Tehran said that he knew Ben was headed for the cave and would probably find a way to get past the gate. In fact, he suspected Ben was forcing the gate open for some time now, so Tehran went down and opened the lock for him instead. That night, they didn't wait to see if he resurfaced. The following morning, Ben's truck was still in the parking lot. However, due to the high amount of summer visitors, employees were too busy to notice. After the second day of being parked in the same spot, Tehran finally noticed it and called the police. And when the police arrived, they searched his truck. First, they found his wallet, then $1,100 in cash, Ben's cell phone, and his diving logs. Now, this is the most interesting part. His diving logs show that he had been exploring the cave and mapping it out for some time now. Other than that, his tanks, wetsuit, and other diving equipment weren't present. There was also no sign of forced entry, so someone stealing his stuff seems unlikely. Next, officers searched the beach house in Santa Rosa. Here they found his dog Spooner. It was hungry from not being fed for 2 days. Back at Vortex Spring, the cadaver dogs led officers to the water surface. Based on the previously found evidence, officers concluded that Ben probably drowned in the cave somewhere. Thus, the recovery search for Ben's body began. Divers from all over heard the story and volunteered for the recovery effort. But here's the catch. While there's a large number of divers, very few of them have the training or the skill to perform the recovery. While it is difficult to know the exact amount of certified cave divers in the world, from what I could find, there are only a few thousand or so. Not surprising considering how risky this sport can be. The most experienced divers started searching. Most divers assumed that Ben probably panicked and entered a small crevice somewhere and couldn't get out. A rather common pattern found when divers die inside caves. In fact, during the recovery effort, one diver panicked and nearly drowned. Now, despite searching for multiple days, Ben still couldn't be found. However, they did find some of his equipment. 2 tanks were found at the entrance of the cave, but this is very strange behavior. Normally, divers place these tanks along their path so they can follow them on their way out. These 2 tanks were found in the piano room, which is much closer to the entrance. They were found next to the talk box. The talk box being a place where divers can surface and talk to one another in a pocket of air. The 3rd tank was found 200 feet inside of the cave. It was a full tank of air with a regulator. Now, although the tanks had been found, Ben was still missing, and at the time, everyone agreed that he was probably still down there, but in a place too deep or too difficult to reach, or at least too difficult for most cave divers. Enter Ed Sorensen. He is not only a veteran cave diver, but a recovery specialist as well, a diver with nearly 2,500 log dives. And on August 22nd, he arrived. That day, he would make 3 dives. He would reach around 1,700 feet deep into the cave. That's about 200 feet further than Ben had mapped. During this time, he would use every method possible to go deeper. That includes using a driver propulsion vehicle and smaller tanks. But let's pause right here. Let's take a moment and understand how Ed is making his way through these narrow passageways, also known as restrictions. Here, it is too tight to fit through with a tank on your back. The proper way to get through here is to remove your tank and fit it through the passageway. Then you squeeze your way through. As you can see, it takes a lot of training to do this and not panic. Now, for reference, Ben is 6'1" and about 210 to 220 pounds. Ed is only 6 feet and 190 pounds. That's about 20 to 30 pounds lighter. This means Ed can squeeze through areas and reach places further than Ben could. But despite searching as far as he could go, he couldn't find anything. No body and no increased activity from aquatic scavengers such as eels or carp. Also, normally when a diver makes their way through the passageway, there are some marks or scratches on the ceiling or floor when fitting through a restriction. Ed didn't find any of that. Basically, there is no evidence that anyone besides him had made their way through up to that point. This will lead him to believe that Ben wasn't in the cave. In fact, in an interview, he would state the following: "The last place I searched was pristine, without a mark that a diver had been there. It would be impossible to go through that restriction without making a mark on the floor or ceiling. He's not in there." Despite this, the McDaniels were still determined to keep looking. If a specialist couldn't find anything, then what about the guy who originally mapped Vortex Cave back in 2003, Steve Keen? However, after 7 dives, he couldn't find anything either. He will later be quoted saying, "If he's in there, I don't know where he'd be." Although the specialist and mapper couldn't find anything, the McDaniels were still not convinced. Maybe Ben is still further in the cave, a place no person can reach safely. But what about a machine? What about an underwater, remotely operated vehicle? or ROV. You see, the Fort Lauderdale police had one, but would only use it if the McDaniels could guarantee to put up $45,000 if it was lost or unrecoverable, which they did. Unfortunately for the McDaniels, the rover couldn't go any further than the human divers had already ventured. During this time, the water at Vortex Spring would be tested over 30 separate times. They tested for an increased number of bacteria, normally associated with a decomposing body. The results would come out negative. In total, 16 divers had spent 36 straight days looking for Ben, all with no results. This understandably frustrated the McDaniels. Plus, they still believed that he was somewhere in the cave that no one could reach. This led them to put up a $10,000 reward to anyone who was brave enough to find Ben. And some divers found this insulting to everyone who had already spent a considerable amount of time volunteering and searching. Others were concerned that the reward could get some would-be treasure hunters killed. However, the McDaniels would increase the reward twice, with the final total reaching $30,000. And in March of 2012, the worst-case scenario would occur. A man named Larry Higginbotham would die deep in the cave. His body would be recovered the next day. In fact, it was Ed Sorensen who would make the recovery. He would state that Larry was found near a shovel left near a restriction so small that no one could get through it, thus cementing his belief that Larry was searching to claim the reward. But it should be noted that there is no direct evidence that specifically states that he was diving there for that reason, only the implied location and the shovel. After a month of criticism, the McDaniels would rescind the reward. And with that, the whole story is concluded, or at least that's what most people thought. But the McDaniels didn't want to leave any stone unturned. In 2011, they believed that Ben was the victim of foul play. They hired a private investigator from Florida to look into everyone involved. First, let's start with the owner of Vortex Spring, Lowell Kelly. He had owned the park since 2007, and he was facing some legal troubles. He had allegedly taken a temporary employee who he said owed him $40,000 out into an isolated wooded area and attempted to beat him with a baseball bat to make him pay up. The man escaped, and the prosecutors later charged Kelly with assault and kidnapping in the incident. Yeah, wild stuff. But it gets even weirder. In 2011, Kelly was hosting a chili cook-off at the park. He reportedly fell down some stairs and sustained a head injury. He would be taken to the hospital the following day after the injury got worse. He would then spend the following month in a comatose state before passing away. So any leads or questions people have for Kelly will remain unanswered. Okay, now we're done with the full story. So let's get into the best part, the theories. Let's start with the first one and the most straightforward one. Ben simply went into the cave. He went into an area he shouldn't have, got stuck, panicked, and is now further than any diver can reach. This theory is consistent with his behavior, from calling his parents the day of the dive to leaving his dog without any food. All points add up to this being an accident. But what if it wasn't? In comes theory 2, a theory where things get a little more sinister. Some people believe that while Ben did die in the cave, his body was discovered earlier and removed from the cave. Perhaps someone wanted to keep Vortex Spring's reputation clean and remove the body covertly and disposed of it at a different location. This would explain some inconsistencies, such as finding no evidence of a decaying body in the cave. However, this theory brings its own set of mysteries, such as who would do something like that, and how did they remove it while going unnoticed. This theory probably raises more questions than answers. Now for the third theory, and the most sinister one. Ben was murdered that night. Some shady individuals either killed him while he was still in the water, or when he was returning. They then probably did the bare minimum to make it seem as though Ben was still in the cave. They then might have dumped the body in a nearby swamp for the alligators. This, of course, is a more conspiratorial theory, so always take it with a grain of salt. Also, according to McDaniels, it took weeks before law enforcement started considering this could have been the result of foul play. The fourth theory is that Ben left. Under the stress of owing $50,000 and a divorce, Ben had enough. He faked his own death and is alive somewhere else. Honestly, for me, this one also seems very unlikely. According to Ben's parents, Ben knew the trauma they went through when they lost Paul in 2008, and according to them, Ben wouldn't put them through that again. But of course, you never know. Maybe he's reclining at a beach somewhere in the Bahamas. Either way, that concludes most of the theories proposed by the people who have already looked into the case. Maybe Ben's still in the cave, or maybe not. Maybe someone got away with something that hasn't been discovered, or maybe not. As for the mysteries of the disappearance of Ben McDaniel, it's just another case that remains unsolved.